It was April 10th, 2014. Just before 6 p.m., the sun hung low over a lonely stretch of Interstate 5 near Orland, California. On that road, a charter bus carrying 44 high school students rumbled north, its passengers buzzing with excitement. These were kids with dreams, kids from working-class families who had boarded that bus to take part in a 2-day college tour at Humboldt State University. For many, this trip was the first step toward a future their families had never known. Laughter, chatter, and the kind of nervous hope only teenagers can carry filled the air. But heading south, coming the opposite way, was something none of them could have imagined. A FedEx truck, massive and unstoppable, barreled down the same road. And then, in a split second that changed everything, it veered across a 60-foot grassy median. Witnesses said it was like watching a monster break free. The truck sideswiped a Nissan sedan and then slammed head-on into the charter bus with a force so violent it could be heard for miles. The sound wasn't just a crash, it was an explosion. Flames erupted instantly, swallowing steel and glass in a fireball that lit up the evening sky. Smoke rose thick and black, curling upward like a signal of disaster. Inside the bus, chaos broke out. Screams, heat, confusion. Teenagers who moments earlier had been dreaming of their future were now fighting for their lives. 17-year-old Jonathan Gutierrez had been asleep when the impact came. He woke to fire, panic, and desperation, leaping from the bus with nothing but the clothes on his back. He escaped with bruises and a split eyebrow, but his friends, his classmates, were still trapped inside. Some never made it out. 18-year-old Ismael Jimenez refused to save only himself. As the flames closed in, he smashed a window and began pulling students out, one by one, until he was overtaken by smoke and fire. He died a hero, his final act one of selflessness. Denise Gomez, also just 18, didn't survive either. She was a leader at her school, a soccer player, a yearbook editor, the kind of student who inspired others. Like Ismael, she carried dreams of being the first in her family to go to college. Adrienne Castro, 19, from El Monte. Marika Serrato, 17, from Riverside. Jennifer Bonilla, who had a twin sister on another bus that arrived safely at Humboldt. All gone in an instant. The fire moved so quickly, so violently, that even adults meant to protect the students stood no chance. Arthur Arzola, a 26-year-old admissions counselor who dedicated his life to guiding kids toward higher education, died later in the hospital. Michael Mivette, 29, and his fiancée Madison Haywood, both volunteering as chaperones, were lost together. This was supposed to be their second year helping kids reach their dreams. Instead, their names joined the list of the fallen. In total, 10 lives were lost that day. 5 students, 3 chaperones, and both drivers. Dozens more were badly injured, some dragged out of the flames with their bodies burning. Survivors later recalled moments that sounded like a nightmare. Friends engulfed by fire, smoke so thick they could hardly breathe, windows cracking under the heat. Some victims were burned so badly they could only be identified by dental records or DNA. May 1st, 2025, Yellowstone, Idaho. The sun was setting over the mountains, washing Highway 20 in a golden glow. That stretch of road, just 16 miles west of Yellowstone National Park, was alive with spring tourists, eager to catch one final glimpse of nature's beauty before nightfall pulled its curtain. In the eastbound lane, a white Mercedes tour van rolled forward, carrying 14 passengers. They were families, friends, travelers from China and Italy, excited and exhausted after a day of wonder inside the park. Their driver, a 46-year-old man from California, kept his hand steady on the wheel. That 2-lane road was familiar to him, and he treated it with respect. In the opposite lane, a black Dodge Ram approached. Behind the wheel was 25-year-old Isaiah Moreno from Humboldt, Texas. People who saw him that evening would later describe the same thing. A truck swerving in and out of its lane, too fast for the curves, too reckless for a road so narrow. What they didn't know then, but investigators would later confirm, was that Moreno was carrying more than just a pickup down that highway. He was carrying a poison in his bloodstream. His blood alcohol level was 0.20%, more than double the legal limit. At 7:15 p.m., everything changed. The Dodge Ram drifted across the center line, directly into the path of the tour van. The collision was violent, unforgiving, the kind of crash that leaves no room for second chances. Metal folded in on itself like paper. Both fuel tanks ruptured, and within seconds the highway wasn't a road anymore, it was a furnace. Flames consumed everything, rising higher than the trees, turning that quiet gateway to Yellowstone into a wall of fire. Screams echoed. Some passengers clawed their way out of the wreckage, coughing, staggering, their clothes scorched. But 6 never had the chance. 5 tourists and the van's driver were trapped inside as the fire devoured the vehicle. In the Dodge Ram, Moreno never made it out. 7 lives, gone before rescuers even arrived. Emergency crews from Fremont County rushed to the scene, their sirens cutting through the smoke-filled air. But even they were powerless at first. The blaze was too intense. They had to fight the fire just to get close enough to drag the injured away. 16 people were left broken and bloodied, 3 clinging to life as helicopters carried them to trauma centers. As the fire smoldered and investigators walked among the twisted wreckage, the truth came into sharp focus. This wasn't fate. This wasn't chance. One trooper said it best. This wasn't an accident. It was a choice. A choice made by a drunk driver who turned a tourist's dream vacation into a nightmare that will haunt families forever. News of the crash spread fast, carried across headlines and broadcast screens worldwide. It wasn't just the numbers, the 7 dead, the 16 injured, that cut so deep. It was the location. One of America's most iconic places, a symbol of untouched beauty, had become the stage for unspeakable loss. The Chinese and Italian consulates issued public condolences. Tour operators rewrote their itineraries, some banning nighttime driving altogether. Idaho officials spoke about checkpoints, lighting, and wider shoulders. But to the families, policy changes didn't matter. Nothing could rewind the moment fire swallowed the road. By the week's end, Highway 20 was no longer just a passage to Yellowstone. It had become a memorial. Flowers lined the asphalt. Photographs fluttered in the wind. A note left by a grieving hand read only 8 words. "We came to see beauty. We found tragedy. And that is the unbearable truth." In a place where travelers searched for wonder, a single drunk driver left behind ashes. Beauty was replaced with horror. Laughter was replaced with silence. And for those left behind, the road to Yellowstone will forever carry the weight of that night. A reminder that when alcohol meets the open road, no one is safe. Isadora Duncan wasn't just a dancer, she was a full-on revolution wrapped in silk scarves and dramatic flair. Known as the mother of modern dance, she tossed ballet slippers aside, twirled barefoot, and insisted on flowing tunics that made her look like she had stepped straight out of a Greek temple. But while her artistry was groundbreaking, her death in 1927 remains one of the most bizarre, tragic, and oddly theatrical exits of all time. Imagine this. You've lived a life full of passion, rebellion, and bold statements against convention, only to be taken out by your very own fashion statement. That's exactly what happened to Isadora on the streets of Nice, France. On the evening of September 14th, she hopped into a sleek little convertible sports car, all ready for a glamorous ride. She wore her signature accessory, a long flowing silk scarf. It wasn't just a scarf, it was practically her trademark, the perfect final touch to her free-spirited look. But what no one realized at that moment was that this very scarf was about to become the most infamous accessory in fashion history. As the car sped off, the scarf trailed behind her dramatically, fluttering in the wind like something out of a Hollywood film. But then tragedy struck. The scarf got caught in the open-spoked wheel of the car. In a blink, the elegant silk turned from harmless fabric to lethal weapon, yanking Duncan out of the car and snapping her neck. Death was instantaneous, and just like that, the legendary dancer was gone. The irony of it all was so striking that newspapers worldwide could hardly believe it. Here was Isadora Duncan, the woman who built her whole career around freedom of movement, around breaking out of stiff corsets and rigid traditions, suddenly cut down by the one piece of fabric she refused to live without. It was so shocking and strange that it quickly became legend. Some reports even claimed her last words were, "Je vais à la gloire," in French meaning, "I am going to glory," before the car drove off, which only made the whole thing seem like a twisted bit of fate's dark humor. Others suggested she said, "I am off to love," which fits her romantic spirit but makes the ending no less tragic. Either way, the story spread like wildfire. Imagine being a journalist in 1927 and trying to write that headline with a straight face. Famed dancer killed by scarf in automobile mishap. You'd almost think it was satire if it weren't so heartbreakingly real. Even medical texts later coined terms like Isadora Duncan syndrome or long scarf syndrome to describe strangulation injuries caused by loose clothing getting caught in machinery. Only Isadora could turn a freak accident into an actual chapter in forensic medicine, but as strange as her death was, it somehow matched the spirit of her life. Duncan was never one for quiet exits or ordinary endings. She had lived boldly, scandalized high society with her lovers and her unconventional lifestyle, and had always demanded attention both on and off the stage. Her dances were wild, emotional, full of abandon, her personal life equally so. So in a way, her death was a final act in the same dramatic play she'd been living all along, a scene so unexpected and shocking that it guaranteed she would never be forgotten. Today, people may not know all the details of her performances, but they know the story of the scarf, the car, and the tragic twist of fate. And that's the strange thing about Isadora Duncan. Her death became just as legendary as her art. It's a cautionary tale about fashion and machinery, yes, but it's also a reminder of how life can turn surreal in an instant. The scarf was supposed to be a symbol of her freedom and beauty. Instead, it became the final curtain call. And somehow, you can't help but think that if anyone were destined to leave the world in such an unforgettable, dramatic fashion, it was Isadora Duncan. It was just after 1 a.m. on June 7, 2014, along the New Jersey Turnpike. A group of friends, comedians, writers, performers, were heading home after a night of laughter at the Dover Downs Hotel and Casino in Delaware. In the van was Tracy Morgan, still riding the wave of his comedy career. Beside him was his longtime friend, 62-year-old James McNair, known to everyone as Jimmy Mack. He wasn't just a comedian. He was a mentor, a giver, a man who spent his life lifting others up. That night, he had joined the tour for support, for camaraderie, but none of them would reach home. A Walmart tractor-trailer barreled toward them from behind. Its driver had been awake for more than 28 hours, nearly 2 days without rest. He never slowed down. At highway speed, he slammed into the back of their customized Mercedes-Benz Sprinter limo. The impact was devastating, igniting a 6-vehicle pileup and ripping the van apart. Inside, chaos unfolded. Most of the passengers weren't wearing seatbelts. Emergency exits had been blocked or jammed. A plywood partition separated the driver from the passengers, cutting off their chance to escape. In the very back, where the crash struck hardest, sat James McNair. He died instantly. For McNair, life had always been about more than the stage. Born in 1951 in Peekskill, New York, he wore many hats, working in a homeless shelter, cooking at the Salvation Army, volunteering at church, organizing community events. He built a platform for others, creating the original Uncle Jimmy Mack Amateur Hour to give unknown comics their first shot at a crowd. Comedy didn't make him rich, but it brought him into the orbit of Tracy Morgan. The two met in Harlem in the early 1990s and became inseparable. As Morgan's career soared, McNair stayed close, writing jokes, offering notes, even freelancing for Saturday Night Live. For Tracy, he was more than a friend. He was family. But on that night, McNair never stood a chance. He left behind 2 children who would never again hear his voice or see him perform. Tracy Morgan survived, but survival came at a brutal cost. His ribs, his leg, his face, broken in multiple places. His brain, injured so severely that doctors placed him in a medically induced coma. For 8 days, he lay unresponsive, balanced between life and death. When he finally woke, he couldn't walk, couldn't talk, couldn't even see clearly. The man who made millions laugh now faced a new battle, remembering how to be himself. Rehab lasted 2 long months. Morgan relearned how to move, how to speak, but his spirit was fractured. He admitted later that depression consumed him, that mood swings left him lost. An upcoming show was canceled. For a time it seemed comedy, the thing that defined him, might be gone forever. The lawsuit that followed was staggering. Walmart settled privately, with reports placing the payout around $90 million, one of the largest personal injury settlements in U.S. history. But even that couldn't close the wounds. Walmart's insurers fought the decision, questioning the settlement, dragging Morgan's name through legal battles, as though his pain could be measured in paperwork. The National Transportation Safety Board left no doubt. The crash was preventable. The driver had violated hours of service rules and sped recklessly into the limo. He took a plea deal, avoided prison, and walked away. But for James McNair, there was no walking away. His body was laid to rest in Cortlandt Manor, New York. His family received part of the settlement, but no amount of money could fill the absence of his laugh, his generosity, his presence. August 4th, 2024, Castle Rock, Colorado. For the Anderson family, it had been a perfect day at the Douglas County Fair. Lieutenant Colonel Matthew "Matt" Anderson, just 39 years old, a proud Air Force veteran and father of 4, pulled into a 7-Eleven gas station to fuel up before driving home. His kids were still buzzing from the fair, chattering in the back seat, completely unaware of the nightmare seconds away. At that same moment, Paul Wayne Stevenson, 57 years old, was tearing down the road in his Chevy Silverado. Hours earlier, he had drowned himself in Fireball whiskey and beer. His blood alcohol level later revealed to be nearly 2.5 times the legal limit. Witnesses say he never even touched the brakes. The Silverado came screaming across the parking lot as it barreled at nearly 50 miles per hour straight toward Matt's SUV. The impact was bone-shattering, the kind of sound that makes bystanders freeze. Matt was trapped, crushed inside. His 4 children were thrown into chaos, but somehow alive, miraculously alive. First responders fought desperately to save him, but the man who had survived deployments, who had coached his kids' soccer teams, who had mentored countless young airmen, didn't survive the parking lot of a 7-Eleven. He was gone in an instant. A decorated officer, a father, a neighbor everyone admired, ripped away because one man chose a bottle over a brake pedal. Castle Rock was shaken to its core. This wasn't just another name in the headlines. This was Matt Anderson. People who knew him couldn't fathom it. People who didn't know instantly what kind of man he must have been by the way the town grieved him. His death wasn't just tragic, it felt like a robbery, and then came the detail that made it all even worse. Stevenson had done this before, a prior DUI conviction. He already knew the danger, he already knew the cost, and still he climbed back behind the wheel, drunk. This time, prosecutors weren't going to treat it like an accident. George Brockler, the same man who had once prosecuted the Aurora theater shooter, made it clear. Stevenson's choices were no different than firing a loaded weapon into a crowd. The jury saw the footage. They heard Matt's widow choke back tears as she explained how she had to tell 4 children their father wasn't coming home. The courtroom fell silent as the horror replayed frame by frame in everyone's minds. In April 2025, the verdict came. Guilty. Not of manslaughter, not of a lesser charge, but guilty in the harshest possible sense. By June, the judge handed down the kind of sentence rarely seen in DUI cases: life in prison without parole, plus 92 years. Outside the courthouse, Matt's oldest son stood tall, clutching the folded American flag that once draped his father's casket. Cameras clicked. Reporters leaned in. And with a voice far older than his years, he said, "My dad always said we should do what's right. Today the court did that for him. Drunk driving isn't a mistake. It isn't an accident. It's a loaded weapon and it kills." Steve Prefontaine was not just another talented runner. He was the embodiment of grit, rebellion, and ambition in American athletics during the early 1970s. Born in Coos Bay, Oregon, he grew up in a working-class family and quickly discovered that his legs could carry him further and faster than most. At the University of Oregon, under the guidance of coach Bill Bowerman, Prefontaine transformed into one of the most electrifying distance runners in the world. He wasn't simply winning races, he was attacking them with an intensity that made track and field exciting to watch. He never sat back and waited for the last lap. He charged from the front, forcing others to keep up with his blistering pace. His charisma, rebellious streak, and unapologetic confidence earned him fans far beyond the track, and by the early 70s, he was a household name among sports enthusiasts. Many believed that the 1976 Montreal Olympics would be the stage where he finally claimed a gold medal, cementing his place as one of the greatest runners in history. But fate, cruel and unforgiving, had other plans. On the night of May 29, 1975, after a small gathering following a meet in Eugene, Prefontaine was driving his bright red 1973 MGB convertible through the winding roads of his hometown. He had dropped off his friend and fellow runner Frank Shorter and was making his way back when tragedy struck. Around 12:30 a.m., his car veered left, struck a curb, and slammed into a rock wall. The vehicle flipped onto its side, and Prefontaine was pinned beneath it, unable to escape. By the time paramedics arrived, he had suffocated from the weight of the overturned car. He was only 24 years old. In a single, devastating moment, the world lost a rising star whose career and life had seemed destined for greatness. The aftermath of his death was marked by both shock and mourning. Reports indicated that Prefontaine's blood alcohol content was above the legal limit, sparking debates about the circumstances of the crash. Some witnesses claimed there may have been another vehicle involved, while others insisted it was a tragic accident brought on by late-night driving on a narrow road. Regardless of the details, the fact remained: one of America's most promising athletes had been taken far too soon. His funeral drew thousands of mourners, a testament to the impact he had made in such a short span of time. For the running community, his loss was more than personal. It felt like the air had been taken out of the sport itself. People didn't just admire his talent, they believed in the fire he carried, the belief that running was not just about medals but about courage, spirit, and leaving nothing behind on the track. Today, his legacy lives on in countless ways. The site of his crash in Eugene, now known as Prees Rock, has become a pilgrimage point for runners from around the globe. Visitors leave medals, race bibs, shoes, and handwritten notes, paying tribute to the man who inspired generations to lace up their shoes and chase greatness. His story has been told through documentaries, films like Without Limits and Prefontaine, and books that dive into his complex personality, a man both celebrated for his fearless competitiveness and remembered for the tragic brevity of his life. While he never got the chance to compete in Montreal, Prefontaine's influence helped fuel the American running boom and solidified his reputation as a symbol of determination and defiance. Even in death, his legend continues to run far ahead of the rest. It was May 4th, 2013, on Interstate 20 in Georgia. The Carth family was on a long drive from North Carolina to Texas, headed to a wedding. Behind the wheel was Mary Ann Carth, a devoted mother of 9. That day, 3 of her children were with her, Caleb in the front seat, and Analia and Mary in the back. 17-year-old Analia was the quiet one, thoughtful, creative, always writing. Her 18th birthday was just around the corner. Beside her sat 13-year-old Mary, the life of the family, with her 2 braids bouncing on her shoulders, always ready to make everyone laugh. Caleb, calm and steady, watched the road ahead. He would be the only one of the 3 to walk away from what was about to happen. Around noon, traffic slowed. Mary Ann tapped the brakes, careful, leaving space between her car and the one in front. But behind them, disaster was already racing forward. A truck hauling cars thundered closer, and the driver never hit the brakes. In an instant, the truck slammed into the back of the Carth's Ford Crown Victoria with devastating force, shoving the car sideways into oncoming traffic. Another vehicle struck them, crushing them further, before their car was pushed under the trailer ahead. That trailer had an underride guard, a steel bar meant to stop smaller vehicles from sliding underneath. But in that moment, when it mattered most, it snapped apart like a twig. The Carth's car was swallowed beneath the truck. The rear end of the car, where Analia and Mary were sitting, was destroyed in an instant. Analia never had a chance. She died immediately. Mary was still alive, but her body was crushed, her injuries catastrophic. Emergency workers fought to save her. They had to cut her braids, her signature look, the hair she had never once cut in her life, just to reach her injuries. 4 days later, on May 8th, Mary died in the hospital. Mary Ann survived with painful injuries, Caleb with a concussion. The truck driver was found unconscious after the crash. Investigators said he had drifted, lost control. He later pled guilty to charges connected to the wreck. His commercial license was suspended for 2 years. But Mary Ann and her husband Jerry couldn't just bury their daughters and move on. They wanted answers. Why had the underride guard failed so catastrophically? It had met federal safety standards, but those standards were from 1998, and those rules never required testing for real-world strength. On paper, it was safe. In reality, it was deadly. Mary Ann began speaking out, carrying her daughter's story everywhere she went. She carried Mary's cut braids with her to events, holding them up as a heartbreaking symbol of what had been lost. Her voice, joined by others, made waves. Some trailer manufacturers listened. In 2015, companies like Stoughton and Vanguard began building stronger guards. J.B. Hunt even ordered trailers with improved safety features. Not because the government forced them to, because grieving families demanded it. But change at the federal level was painfully slow. Proposals dragged on for years. It wasn't until 2022, nearly a decade after the crash, that stronger underride rules were finally enacted. And even then, side guards, which could save countless lives, were left out. Today, most trucks on American highways still don't have them. For Mary Ann, this fight became her life's work. She partnered with another mother, Lois Durso, who also lost a daughter in an underride crash. Together, they lobbied, met lawmakers, filed petitions, and pushed relentlessly. Parts of their proposal were included in the 2021 bipartisan infrastructure bill, but still, many gaps remain. May 19, 2024, Pune, India. Just after 2:30 a.m., the Kalyani Nagar intersection was quieter than usual. Riding side by side on a scooter were 2 young IT engineers, both just 24, Anish Awadia and Ashwini Koshta. They were heading home after a long day, unaware that in seconds their lives would be violently stolen. The silence of the night was suddenly broken by a sound no one could mistake, the deafening roar of a Porsche Taycan. a $150,000 electric supercar ripping through the streets with no license plates. Witnesses later said it was flying at nearly 125 miles per hour, triple the speed limit. Behind the wheel was 17-year-old Vedant Agarwal, the son of one of Pune's most powerful real estate developers. Earlier that night, he had been drinking heavily at 2 upscale bars, and he wasn't alone. 2 friends sat beside him in the Porsche, laughing, recording videos, capturing their luxury-fueled chaos for social media. Hours earlier, they were posting champagne glasses and designer shots. Minutes later, they would be responsible for a scene of devastation. As Anish and Ashwini entered the intersection, the Porsche came hurtling toward them like a missile. The impact was instant, brutal. The scooter was obliterated, its riders flung nearly 20 feet across the asphalt. The force left no chance of survival. In seconds, 2 bright young lives, full of dreams and futures, were extinguished. But what followed in the hours after the crash is what ignited a nationwide fury. At the hospital, police moved quickly to draw Vedant's blood to confirm intoxication. That's when investigators say a cover-up began. Allegedly, his parents, working with hospital staff, tried to swap his blood sample with someone else's, erasing the evidence of alcohol. The deception didn't hold. At a second hospital, the truth came out, and suddenly the story was no longer just about a crash. It was about power, privilege, and corruption. Images and videos of the aftermath flooded social media. The mangled scooter lying in pieces, the Porsche looking eerily untouched, police officers shielding the teenager from cameras. And then came the decision that stunned the nation. The Juvenile Justice Board ruled that Vedant would be tried as a minor. Months away from turning 18, he faced, at most, 3 years in a juvenile facility. Not prison, not decades behind bars. 3 years. The anger boiled over. His father was arrested for orchestrating the blood swap. His mother, too, was later detained for her role, though released on bail after 10 months. The bars that served him alcohol came under investigation, accused of fueling the reckless night. Across India, the case reignited an old wound, the feeling that the wealthy always manage to escape real punishment, while ordinary families are left to bury their loved ones. For Anish and Ashwini's families, this wasn't about politics or legal loopholes. It was about 2 children they would never see again. 2 young professionals who had worked hard, carved out their place in a competitive industry, and had it all ripped away because a privileged teenager wanted to feel untouchable in a 200-month machine. In a country where 178,000 people died in road crashes just last year, this case became more than a headline. It became a mirror, forcing millions to ask whether justice in India was something you could buy, and whether a last name mattered more than the lives of 2 innocent people. Even now, investigators continue to sift through CCTV footage, witness statements, and digital evidence pulled from Vedant's phone. But the truth feels painfully clear. Anish and Ashwini didn't die because of fate. They didn't die because of chance. They died because speed, alcohol, and privilege collided in the worst possible way. And for millions watching, the question still echoes. Will justice ever be served when the driver's last name carries more weight than the blood he spilled on the street? Roland Ratzenberger's story is one of both inspiration and tragedy, the kind that reminds us of the razor-thin line between ambition and danger in Formula One. In the spring of 1994, Ratzenberger was living his lifelong dream, competing at the highest level of motorsport. Born in Austria, he had worked his way up through the ranks, a journeyman racer who was more grit than glamour, finally landing a seat with the small but determined Simtek team. For him, even a modest F1 drive meant he had reached the pinnacle. That weekend, at Imola, however, fate would write his name into history under the darkest of circumstances. During qualifying for the San Marino Grand Prix, Ratzenberger's front wing sustained damage on an earlier lap after running wide. Instead of returning to the pits, he pushed on for another flying lap after all. This was only his second race weekend in Formula One, and he was desperate to prove himself. As he hurtled down toward the Villeneuve corner at more than 300 kilometers per hour, the weakened wing gave way completely. In an instant, his Simtek lost downforce and control, sending the car straight on into a concrete wall at terrifying speed. The impact was catastrophic, leaving him with a fatal skull fracture. Rescue crews arrived quickly, but there was nothing that could be done. Roland Ratzenberger was just 33 years old. The shock of Ratzenberger's death rippled through the paddock. It had been 12 years since Formula One had lost a driver during a Grand Prix weekend, and the sport had lulled itself into a fragile sense of safety. Ratzenberger's accident was a brutal reminder that the risks were never truly gone. Yet, in the cruelest twist of fate, his death was almost immediately overshadowed by what happened the very next day, when Ayrton Senna, one of the greatest drivers the sport has ever known, was killed during the race. In the collective memory of fans and the media, Senna's passing became the defining tragedy of Imola '94, often leaving Ratzenberger remembered as the other driver who died that weekend. But for those who knew him, friends, family, fellow racers, Roland's loss was no less profound. He had fought hard to get to Formula One, and his story was one of perseverance, passion, and the determination to chase a dream even when the odds seemed stacked against him. In the aftermath, though, Ratzenberger's death was far from forgotten by the governing body. Along with Senna's, his accident became the catalyst for sweeping changes in safety standards across Formula One. Track layouts were altered to include more runoff areas and fewer concrete walls close to the racing line. Car designs were reevaluated to better withstand high-speed impacts. The FIA pushed forward with reforms that led to the introduction of the Hans device to prevent fatal head injuries, safer cockpit structures, and stricter crash tests for teams. It is a legacy written in both loss and progress. Drivers today benefit from protections that emerged out of that dark weekend at Imola. Roland Ratzenberger may not be the first name that comes to mind when people recall Formula One's history, but his sacrifice helped shape the safer sport we see today. His story is a poignant reminder that behind every helmet is a human being, carrying dreams, risks, and vulnerabilities, and that even in tragedy, change and awareness can emerge. Ratzenberger's career may have been brief, but his impact on the sport continues to resonate decades later. It was April 6, 2018, on a quiet stretch of highway near Armley, Saskatchewan. A bus carried 28 souls, players, coaches, and staff from the Humboldt Broncos junior hockey team. They were headed north on Highway 35 toward Nipawin, chasing a playoff dream. For the town of Humboldt, a place of fewer than 6,000, the Broncos weren't just a hockey team, they were family. The boys lived with host families, went to local schools, and wore the green and gold with pride. That night, after a grueling triple overtime loss days before, they were determined to fight back in Game 5. The bus was driven by Glenn Dirksen, a seasoned, careful driver. Inside, the players were buzzing with energy, joking, listening to music, preparing themselves mentally for the game ahead. But around 5 p.m., just outside Tisdale, everything unraveled in an instant. At a place locals know as Armley Corner, the intersection of Highway 35 and Highway 335, the bus crossed paths with a transport truck. That truck was driven by 29-year-old Jaskirat Singh Sidhu, a new trucker hauling heavy bales of peat moss. He was supposed to stop at a flashing stop sign, but he didn't. Traveling nearly 100 kilometers per hour, Sidhu blew straight through it, and in that moment the Broncos bus struck the side of the truck's lead trailer. The sound was deafening. The impact ripped the front of the bus apart, scattering metal, glass, and bodies into a nearby snowy field. The load of peat moss spilled everywhere. The chaos that followed was unbearable. Some players were thrown from the bus, their bodies lying in the snow. Others were trapped inside, screaming, crying, or silent. Defenseman Ryan Strashnitsky blacked out, only to wake moments later on the frozen ground. He couldn't move his legs. Around him lay teammates, bloodied and broken. Beside him, Nick Shumlansky moaned in pain. Not far away was defenseman Logan Boulet, who would not survive. 14 lives were lost right there at the scene. Emergency crews swarmed in, pulling survivors from the wreckage, rushing them to hospitals. 2 more would die in the days after. In total, 16 lives were taken. 10 players, ranging from just 16 to 21 years old, including Captain Logan Schatz and the youngest, Adam Harold, along with coaches, team staff, and driver Glenn Dirksen. The survivors were scarred forever, their lives divided into before and after. And then came the cruelest twist. In the aftermath, one of the defensemen, Xavier Labelle, was mistaken for teammate Parker Tobin. Both had dyed blonde hair, both had playoff beards. Labelle had no ID and was unconscious. His family was told he had died. Parker's family was told he had survived. It wasn't until days later, when Xavier opened his eyes and whispered his name, that the truth was revealed. 2 families had their worlds turned upside down twice. The crash shattered more than a team. It broke a nation's heart. Tributes poured in from across Canada and beyond. Wayne Gretzky wept in public. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau spoke in disbelief. Even Donald Trump sent condolences from the U.S. NHL players wore Broncos jerseys in honor. Investigators soon pieced together what had happened. Sidhu had missed more than just a stop sign. He had broken multiple safety rules in the days leading up to the crash, driving too long, failing to log his hours properly. He admitted he had been distracted by a flapping tarp on his trailer. He wasn't impaired, but he wasn't paying attention either. One small failure to stop cost 16 lives. In January 2019, Sidhu stood in court, his voice trembling as he pled guilty to 29 charges. He made no excuses. The judge sentenced him to 8 years in prison, but the story didn't end there. Sidhu was a permanent resident, not a Canadian citizen. After serving part of his sentence, he was granted parole, but deportation loomed. In May 2024, the order came. He was to be sent back to India. His lawyers appealed, pointing to his young son's serious health issues and the lack of adequate care in India. Families of the victims were split. Some believed deportation was justice. Others, like the father of Evan Thomas, said it wasn't necessary. Ryan Strashnitsky, now paralyzed from the chest down, chose compassion, saying he wished Sidhu peace, human to human. May 30th, 2025, Little Havana, Miami. At just after 1 a.m., 41-year-old Catherine Kipnis stepped off the curb near her apartment. She had walked this street countless times before. She loved Little Havana. That night was supposed to be like any other, a short walk home after visiting friends, but a nightmare was already racing toward her. A white BMW 330. I tore down the road far too fast for the empty stretch of pavement. Behind the wheel was 32-year-old Ivana Gomez. Later tests would reveal her blood alcohol level was well over Florida's legal limit, between 0.09% and 0.112%. She should never have been driving, but she was. The BMW hit Catherine with a force so violent it defies imagination. Her head shattered the windshield. Her hair became caught in the seatbelt, and then her body was dragged more than 230 feet, 70 yards of horror. Witnesses later said she died instantly, but the brutality of what followed left a scar on the entire city. Because Catherine's final moments weren't unseen. A Miami police officer was right there. He watched the impact. He saw the BMW keep going. And in an instant, the quiet streets of Little Havana erupted into chaos. A high-speed pursuit as Gomez pushed her car past 100 miles per hour. The chase only ended when she stopped at a red light several blocks away as if nothing had happened. When officers approached, the details were chilling. The smell of alcohol, bloodshot eyes, fresh vomit in the car. She failed the sobriety test. But what shocked people most wasn't the crash. It was what she reportedly said afterward. When asked about the woman she had just struck, Gomez allegedly brushed it off. It was just a homeless person. That sentence was like a dagger to the city's heart, because Catherine wasn't homeless. She was a daughter, a friend, a neighbor, a woman whose life mattered. And even if she had been homeless, did that make her life disposable? Did that make her death meaningless? The cruelty of those words became the spark for outrage. In the days that followed, Little Havana turned into a shrine. Flowers and candles lined the spot where Catherine was killed. Strangers who had never met her scrawled her name on cardboard signs that read, "She mattered, because she did," and because the way her life was taken was too brutal, too senseless to ignore. Prosecutors charged Gomez with DUI manslaughter and vehicular homicide. Her bond was set at $251,000. They seized her phone, her blood samples, and every second of surveillance footage, piecing together the violence of that night frame by frame. And yet what the city wrestled with wasn't just the crash. It was the coldness afterward. The idea that a human life could be reduced to nothing with a single careless comment. In Florida, DUI manslaughter carries up to 15 years in prison. But many said that wasn't nearly enough. If you drink, drive, kill someone, and treat it like nothing happened, one attorney told reporters, you shouldn't get a second chance behind the wheel. Tonight, Ivana Gomez sits in custody, awaiting trial. Catherine's friends wait too. They want justice. But even if it comes, it won't undo what happened on that quiet Miami street. It won't bring her back. That's the cruelest part of all. And that's the question that lingers. Was it the alcohol that destroyed Catherine Kipnis? Or was it the lack of humanity afterward? Jackson Pollock's death in 1956 wasn't just the tragic end of a famous painter. It was the kind of story that feels more like a scene from a cautionary movie than real life. By then, Pollock was already a legend, known as the wild genius of abstract expressionism, splattering paint across canvases in ways that baffled some and mesmerized others. He was at once celebrated and criticized, a man whose talent seemed inseparable from his demons. Alcohol was his constant shadow, and it was not exactly a secret in the art world that his drinking was both fueling and destroying him. On the night of August 11th, 1956, those demons finally caught up. Driving his Oldsmobile convertible on the country roads of East Hampton, New York, Pollock was behind the wheel, drunk and reckless. With him were his mistress Ruth Kligman and her friend Edith Metzger. Less than a mile from his home, he lost control of the car, which skidded off the road, flipped, and slammed into a tree. The crash Pollock instantly and also claimed the life of Edith Metzger, while Ruth Kligman survived with serious injuries. It was a shocking, violent ending for an artist whose life had been one long collision between brilliance and self-destruction. The crash immediately took on a symbolic weight. Pollock had been struggling for years, his creativity had slowed, his drinking had worsened, and his marriage to fellow painter Lee Krasner was strained. He was just 44 years old. Still young enough that people expected more great work from him, but also old enough to have left a mark on art history. The manner of his death, reckless, dramatic, tragic, seemed to fit the myth of the tortured artist almost too perfectly. His wife Krasner, who was in Europe at the time, rushed back to New York when she heard the news. While grief-stricken, she took on the role of guardian of his legacy, ensuring that Pollock was remembered not just for the way he died, but for the art he left behind. She organized exhibitions, managed his estate, and effectively shaped how the world would come to view Jackson Pollock. In that sense, his death became the start of his immortality. What could have been just a tragic accident on a summer night instead turned into the cementing of a legend. Pollock the man was gone, but Pollock the icon, the revolutionary who changed modern art, was here to stay. Looking back, it is easy to see his fatal drive as the inevitable last act of someone who lived constantly on the edge. Pollock never did things halfway. His painting style was wild and physical, with him often dripping, flinging, and almost dancing with the canvas as if locked in combat. That same intensity carried over into his personal life, his drinking binges, his outbursts, his insecurities. The car crash was, in a way, an extension of that restless energy he could not control. Yet it would be unfair to reduce him only to that narrative of self-destruction. His art genuinely changed the way people thought about painting. He pushed boundaries, broke rules, and forced the world to see that beauty could come from chaos. The tragedy of his death is that it froze him forever at 44, leaving us to wonder what else he might have created had he lived longer. Had he found a way to escape the grip of alcohol? Had that car stayed on the road? But history rarely gives us what-ifs. Instead, it gives us stories like Jackson Pollock's, messy, dramatic, and unforgettable. His death may have been violent, but his influence remains unshaken, still splattered across the canvas of modern art history. It was April 25, 2019, in Lakewood, Colorado. Traffic on Interstate 70 had already slowed to a crawl after a school bus crash near the Ward Road exit. Cars lined up for miles, engines idling, drivers impatient but unaware that something far worse was barreling toward them. Around 4:30 p.m., 23-year-old Rogel Lazaro Aguilera Medeiros was coming down the steep mountain stretch near Genesee in an 18-wheeler stacked high with lumber. He was young, originally from Cuba, living in Texas and working for a small Houston trucking company. But that afternoon, something was terribly wrong. His truck wasn't slowing. It was speeding up. Witnesses saw it flying downhill at over 85 miles per hour, smoke pouring from the wheels. He blew past a runaway truck ramp, then another. Exit after exit flashed by, each a chance to stop the disaster. He never took them. Ahead, traffic had nearly stopped, backed up from the earlier crash. Dozens of people sat trapped in their cars, unaware that death was racing straight toward them. Aguilera Medeiros swerved desperately, weaving between vehicles, nearly forcing some off the road. One driver even went live on social media, capturing the semi thundering past at impossible speed. Seconds later, the inevitable happened. The truck slammed into the line of traffic, minus 28 vehicles crushed in an instant, including 3 other semis. The force unleashed chaos. One truck carried gasoline, another mattresses, combined with Aguilera Medeiros' load of lumber. The collision turned the highway into an inferno. Flames erupted. Black smoke rose into the sky. Explosions echoed across Lakewood. People miles away could see the fire and hear the blasts. By the time emergency crews arrived, the scene was apocalyptic. 4 men were gone. 61-year-old Doyle Harrison, 67-year-old William Bailey, 69-year-old Stanley Politano, and 24-year-old Miguel Angel Lamas Arellano. 6 more were badly injured, among them an EMT named Malaya Harsh, who was pregnant at the time. She later admitted she thought she and her baby were going to die. Somehow both survived. Firefighters battled the blaze for hours. The wreckage smoldered until nearly 10 p.m. The interstate didn't reopen until the next evening. Aguilera Maderos himself walked away without a scratch. He didn't run, didn't resist. Police arrested him the next morning. At first, he faced vehicular manslaughter charges, but investigators pushed further. 40 charges were eventually filed: vehicular assault, reckless driving, and multiple counts of first-degree assault with extreme indifference. In court, Aguilera Maderos wept, insisting he never wanted to hurt anyone, that his brakes had failed. He had no record, no history of violence, just a wife and a young son waiting at home. But prosecutors saw it differently. They argued he had blown past every warning sign, ignored every escape ramp, and drove recklessly into disaster. They pointed to his employer, Castellano 03 Trucking, a company riddled with safety violations, even hiring drivers who couldn't read English on roads where every critical warning sign was written in it. The trial came in September 2021. A jury convicted him on 27 charges. That December, Judge Bruce Jones handed down a sentence so staggering it shocked the nation, minus 110 years in prison. The judge admitted his hands were tied by Colorado law, but said plainly the punishment was more than he believed was fair. Millions signed a petition demanding justice. On December 30th, 2021, Colorado's governor stepped in. The sentence was reduced to 10 years. Aguilera Maderos would still serve time, but not die in prison. August 11th, 2025, Bronx, New York. Just before 1 a.m. on the Bronx River Parkway, southbound traffic moved steadily. Workers heading home, late-night diners easing back to their neighborhoods. But one driver was not heading home quietly. He was about to turn the parkway into a nightmare. Behind the wheel of a Mercedes was 21-year-old Mauricio Narayu of White Plains. Witnesses would later say he was weaving through traffic at dangerous speeds, his headlights darting between lanes like a predator closing in. And then, chaos. Mauricio swerved into the middle lane, slamming into a Volkswagen GTI. The Volkswagen careened into the guardrail, sparks flying as metal screamed against metal. But the destruction didn't stop there. The Mercedes veered again, lunging into the right lane. In its path were 2 mopeds side by side. On them rode Enrique Martinez, just 21, and his friend Manuel Amarante Panalo, only 19. They never had a chance to react. In one brutal second, the Mercedes tore through them. The sound was deafening. Witnesses later described it as an explosion, followed by the shrill scrape of twisting steel and shattering glass. The mopeds were demolished. Both young men were thrown to the asphalt, their bodies helpless against the violence of impact. Drivers slammed on brakes, jumped from their cars, dialed 911 with shaking hands, but the damage was already done. Paramedics raced to the scene under the glare of emergency lights. Enrique was found unresponsive. He was rushed to Jacobi Medical Center, but doctors could only declare what everyone feared. He was gone. Manuel, clinging to life, was transported to Montefiore Hospital. Within the hour, he too was pronounced dead. 2 lives erased in the span of a heartbeat. And still, the tragedy deepened. Police said the Mercedes driver, Mauricio, showed clear signs of intoxication. He failed the field sobriety test and was immediately taken into custody. Prosecutors later hit him with charges of vehicular manslaughter, driving while intoxicated, and operating while impaired. What began as a single reckless driver became a chain reaction disaster. 7 vehicles involved, their frames twisted and scattered across the pavement. The parkway turned into a graveyard of crumpled steel and broken glass. Floodlights illuminating the investigators as they traced skid marks and photographed what was left behind. By the next morning, the Bronx was in mourning. Friends and family of Enrique and Manuel gathered at the crash site, placing flowers, candles, and handwritten notes on the guardrail. Grief poured out in words and tears. Enrique's cousin said he was like a big brother to everyone. Manuel's childhood friend remembered him as the kind of person who would hand you his last dollar without hesitation. Both young men had been working toward better futures. Both futures were stolen. For residents near the parkway, this wasn't shocking. It was infuriating. One man who lived nearby told reporters, "People speed here all the time. They weave in and out like it's a racetrack. He had seen it before, but this time it cost two families everything. Now, funerals are being planned instead of milestones celebrated. Two mothers will bury their sons, while a 21-year-old driver sits in a cell awaiting his fate. The investigation continues, but the truth is already undeniable. Two young men are dead, not because of bad luck, not because of fate, but because someone thought they could drink, drive, and outrun the consequences. Nick Adenhart's story is one of the most heartbreaking what-could-have-been tales in baseball history, and the tragedy that struck him in April 2009 still lingers in the memory of fans, teammates, and anyone who followed the sport. Just hours before his life was cut short, Adenhart, a 22-year-old pitcher for the Los Angeles Angels, had delivered the kind of performance that suggested his career was about to take off 6 scoreless innings against the Oakland Athletics. Display of poise and talent that made people believe he might become a cornerstone of the Angels' rotation. But in the early hours of April 9, 2009, as he rode through Fullerton, California, in a Mitsubishi Eclipse with 3 friends, his life and the lives of others were stolen in an instant. A Toyota minivan, driven by 22-year-old Andrew Thomas Gallo, blew through a red light at high speed and slammed into their car. The crash killed Adenhart, 20-year-old student and aspiring sports agent Courtney Stewart, and 25-year-old Henry Pearson. The 4th passenger, John Wilhite, miraculously survived despite an injury doctors call internal decapitation, something so severe that most never lived to tell the tale. Investigators quickly revealed that Gallo was driving drunk, with a blood alcohol content more than twice the legal limit, and had a prior DUI conviction as well as a suspended license. To make matters worse, he fled the scene on foot, leaving behind the devastation he had caused. The details were shocking, but what stung most for fans was the cruel timing. Adenhart had finally overcome injuries, surgeries, and the grind of minor league baseball to earn his place in the majors, and within hours of proving he belonged, his life was gone. The baseball world responded in grief and disbelief. The Angels postponed their next game, and when they returned to the field, they played with heavy hearts, wearing black patches with Adenhart's number 34. At Angel Stadium, a spontaneous memorial grew as fans left flowers, jerseys, caps, and handwritten notes. Teammates, many choking back tears, spoke of his dedication, his quiet confidence, and how much he loved the game. Off the field, the legal process unfolded. In 2010, Andrew Gallo was convicted of 3 counts of second-degree murder, as well as DUI and hit-and-run charges, and sentenced to 51 years to life in prison, a verdict that brought a sense of justice, but no true comfort to the families who had lost so much. In the years since, Adenhart's memory has been kept alive through scholarships, dedications, and tributes. A Little League field in Maryland, where he grew up, was renamed in his honor, the Cedar Rapids. Colonels retired his jersey, and the Angels ensured his presence remained in their clubhouse. Survivor John Wilhite's recovery became a story of resilience, as he defied grim odds, underwent groundbreaking spinal surgery, and later returned to the Angels' spring training as a symbol of hope in the midst of tragedy. Looking back more than a decade later, Adenhart's story is not just about a promising athlete lost too soon, but also about the senseless devastation that drunk driving can cause. His death serves as a sobering reminder of how fragile life is and how reckless decisions can ripple outward, destroying dreams, families, and futures. And yet, in the way his teammates, community, and even strangers rallied to honor his memory, Adenhart continues to make an impact far beyond the baseball diamond, a legacy not built on stats or victories, but on the inspiration and cautionary lessons his story leaves behind.